Investors argued in rapid Korean until the quiet waitress translated perfectly and changed everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The restaurant was buzzing with the usual weekday evening rush. Waitresses moved in a synchronized dance, delivering drinks, refilling glasses, and taking orders with practiced efficiency. In the corner booth by the large windows, a group of investors sat, deep in a heated discussion. They were all highly successful men, dressed in sharp suits that screamed wealth and power. Their conversation, however, was not in the typical language you would expect from such influential figures. The table was littered with laptops, stacks of papers, and expensive-looking coffee cups, but the mood was anything but professional. It was tense, filled with the kind of energy you get when decisions worth millions of dollars are on the line. What was surprising, however, was the language they were speaking, Korean. Rapid-fire Korean. The kind of conversation where no one had the patience to slow down, and the stakes were high. They were all trying to outdo each other, throwing out ideas and counterarguments with the speed of seasoned negotiators. To anyone else in the restaurant, the conversation would have seemed incomprehensible, a blur of foreign words and sharp tones. But to those involved, every word mattered. Every argument, every suggestion was building towards a multi-million-dollar decision. Meanwhile, across the room, Christina Matthews, a waitress at the restaurant, silently observed the scene. She had been working at the restaurant for months now, quietly doing her job. She was never one to stand out. She was the quiet type, not the kind of person who drew attention. In fact, most of the time, people didn't even notice her. And that was just how she liked it. She had her reasons for wanting to remain in the background. Her life was complicated, and it was easier to stay invisible. However, that night, something was different. Christina couldn't help but overhear the investors as they argued. She didn't mean to, but their voices cut through the restaurant's noise. The speed and intensity of their conversation struck her. And then, in a moment that would change everything, one of the investors, frustrated by the others, shouted something in Korean, loud enough that everyone in the restaurant could hear. His words were sharp, demanding, and filled with authority. But it was clear to Christina that the other investors didn't fully understand. She didn't know why, but for some reason, she couldn't ignore it. She had learned Korean years ago, not because she wanted to, but because her family had moved to Seoul when she was younger. She had studied the language and spoken it fluently for years, but she hadn't used it in a long time. Still, in that moment, she understood exactly what the man had said, and it wasn't good. She had a choice. She could ignore it, as everyone else had done, or she could do something about it. The words hung in the air, and without thinking, she walked over to the table. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. This was a moment she couldn't let pass by. As she approached the group, the room seemed to go quiet. She stood there for a second, gathering her thoughts. The investors, momentarily distracted from their conversation, looked up at her with confusion. Christina, calm and composed, smiled slightly, and in flawless Korean, translated the investor's words to the rest of the group. He said that we need to move fast, or we will lose the deal. The room went still. It wasn't just her translation that stunned everyone. It was the way she had said it, with such confidence, with such clarity, that it left no room for doubt. These were high-powered executives used to being in control, and yet, they were now in the presence of someone who understood them in a way they hadn't expected. They stared at her, mouths agape, as the reality of the situation set in. For the first time that evening, they realized that the quiet waitress they had completely overlooked was the one who had just changed everything. The room fell silent for a moment after Christina spoke. The investors exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of surprise, confusion, and curiosity. They were used to being in control, used to their world of high-powered negotiations and multi-million-dollar deals. But this was different. A waitress had just translated their conversation perfectly, leaving them stunned. Christina stood there, her posture calm, as though this was just another day. But inside, her heart raced. She hadn't expected to speak up. She hadn't planned to be the one to change the course of the conversation, yet here she was, standing in front of them, knowing she had just done something that none of them would forget. The silence stretched on, almost unbearably long. Finally, the CEO, the man who had been arguing the most aggressively, broke the silence. "I don't believe it," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "How did you understand him so well?" Christina hesitated for a moment before responding. She had never been the type to brag or draw attention to herself. "I grew up in Seoul," she said softly. "I speak Korean." The room seemed to shift as they all processed her words. The realization hit them all at once. She wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't just some employee who served their food. She was someone who had been silently observing, understanding everything they said, even when they thought no one else could. The CEO narrowed his eyes, his curiosity piqued. "You speak Korean?" he repeated, as though testing her. Christina nodded, her voice steady. "Yes, I do. I learned it as a child. It comes in handy sometimes." She smiled, trying to keep the atmosphere light. But deep down, she knew this moment was anything but ordinary. The CEO leaned forward, his eyes fixed on her with a new intensity. "Well then," he said, his voice shifting from disbelief to something else, something more respectful. "I think you just saved this deal." He paused, letting the words sink in. "If you hadn't translated that, I'm not sure what would have happened." Christina nodded again, but inside, she felt a quiet pride. This was the moment she had been waiting for, even if she hadn't realized it at the time. The investors were no longer just dismissing her as a mere waitress. They were looking at her like she was something more. As the conversation slowly picked up again, this time with a new sense of respect for Christina, she quietly took a step back, allowing them to continue. But it wasn't long before one of the investors, a younger man with a sharp suit and a more open demeanor, spoke up. "You're more than just a waitress, aren't you?" he asked, his voice genuine. Christina smiled politely, but remained silent. She didn't want to reveal too much. She didn't want to give them any more reason to pry into her life. But the question lingered in the air, and she could sense that they were all beginning to see her in a different light. The conversation shifted. They weren't just discussing the deal anymore. They were talking about potential, about future opportunities, and somehow, Christina had become an integral part of the discussion. The CEO leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving her. "I don't know what else you're capable of, Christina," he said. "But I know this. You just saved this deal, and I can't ignore that." Christina felt a knot form in her stomach. She had no desire to get involved in their world of high finance and cutthroat business, but she could sense that the CEO wasn't the type of man to let something like this go unnoticed. She couldn't help but feel a flicker of doubt. What had she just done? Was it a mistake to speak up? She had always kept a low profile, always stayed in the background. It had always been easier that way. But now, it seemed like the world was starting to notice her. She could feel the weight of their attention on her. And for the first time, it didn't feel entirely uncomfortable. The room was still. The CEO's words hung in the air, thick with meaning. He had just acknowledged her in a way that no one ever had before. It was as if, in that one moment, she had shifted from being invisible to being someone of importance. Christina wasn't sure what would happen next. But one thing was clear, nothing would ever be the same. She had spoken up, she had translated, and in doing so, she had changed the course of their discussion, and perhaps, her life as well. The CEO's voice broke the silence once more. "Christina," he said, his tone softer now, less businesslike. "I'm impressed. You've got a sharp mind. Have you ever thought about doing something else? Something more?" She hesitated. It was tempting. She had worked hard to get by, to keep her head down, to avoid attention. But there was something about his offer that made her pause. She looked at him, then at the other investors, who were all waiting for her response. They were all looking at her like she was the key to something bigger. "I'm happy here," she replied quietly, though a small part of her wondered if she was being entirely honest. The CEO studied her for a moment, his eyes searching hers. Then, without another word, he nodded. "Well, if you ever change your mind, let me know." The conversation continued, but Christina's mind wandered. She was no longer just the waitress. In that moment, she had become something more. The following days at the restaurant were a blur for Christina. Her once quiet existence had been replaced by a constant undercurrent of curiosity and attention from the investors. She went about her usual duties, refilling drinks, serving meals, and keeping the peace between the increasingly demanding patrons. But her mind often wandered back to the conversation with the CEO. She couldn't shake the feeling that her life was on the cusp of changing in a way she hadn't expected. It was a strange sensation, knowing she had made an impact in a room full of powerful people, but also not knowing where that impact would lead. Every time the CEO, Jack Anderson, returned to the restaurant, he greeted her with a nod, a slight smile, as if she had become part of his world. He never asked her to join the conversations at his table again, but the way he looked at her made it clear he was intrigued. He had offered her a chance to be part of something bigger, but Christina had declined. She wasn't sure what to make of his offer. She had worked hard to carve out a life for herself in the shadows, but now, it felt like the shadows were growing smaller. On the evening of Jack's return to the restaurant, the atmosphere felt different. The usual chatter of the restaurant seemed to fade into the background as Christina caught sight of him across the room. His table was crowded with investors and business partners, but his eyes were fixed on her. As if sensing his gaze, she turned to meet his stare, and for a moment, the rest of the world seemed to disappear. Jack stood up from his seat and walked over to her. His tall figure cut through the crowd, and the familiar air of authority he carried with him followed. As he approached, Christina couldn't help but feel a mix of nervousness and curiosity. She had been trying to ignore the pull she felt towards him, but something about him made it difficult to stay detached. "Christina," Jack said, his voice soft but commanding. "I wanted to speak with you again. Would you mind sitting down for a moment?" She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Of course, Mr. Anderson," she replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. They walked to a quieter corner of the restaurant, away from the noise and chaos of the evening. Christina was surprised by how easy it was to walk alongside him. Despite his wealth and power, there was a quiet intensity about him that made her feel like she was just another person in the room. He wasn't like the other businessmen she had seen come and go. Jack motioned for her to sit as they reached a small table by the window. He sat across from her, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. "I wanted to thank you," he began. "Not just for translating that night, but for showing me something I hadn't realized I needed." Christina looked at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "I've been living in a world of transactions," Jack explained. "Every decision I make is based on logic, strategy, and the bottom line. But that night, you reminded me of something that I had forgotten. The value of human connection. The way you translated, without hesitation, without needing anything in return, made me realize that I've been missing something essential in my life." Christina felt her heart skip a beat. She hadn't expected such honesty from him. She was used to people in his world, the world of power and money, treating others like commodities. But Jack seemed different. He was speaking to her like she was important, not just as a waitress, but as a person. "I don't know what to say," she said quietly. "I didn't do it for anything. It was just instinct." "That's the problem," Jack said, leaning forward slightly. "I think too much. I analyze everything, weigh the pros and cons, but I've forgotten how to trust my instincts." "You didn't question it, you just acted. That's something I admire." Christina shifted in her seat, feeling the weight of his words. "But I'm just a waitress," she said, almost defensively. "I don't belong in your world." Jack shook his head, his eyes intense. "That's exactly the point. You see things clearly because you don't get bogged down by all the noise and expectations. You're not trying to prove anything, and that's why I think you're exactly the kind of person I need in my life." The words hung in the air, and Christina felt a lump form in her throat. She hadn't expected this kind of conversation, this kind of attention. She had always kept her distance, hiding behind the routine of her job. But now, it was as if Jack was pulling her out of the shadows and into the light. "What are you asking me?" she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack paused for a moment, looking down at the table as if gathering his thoughts. "I'm asking you to consider joining me, Christina, not as a waitress, but as someone who could help me navigate the complexities of my business. I don't want to do this alone anymore. I've realized that I need someone who sees things from a different perspective, someone who isn't caught up in the corporate world." Christina blinked, the weight of his offer sinking in. This wasn't just a business proposal. This was a chance to change everything. But was she ready for that? Was she ready to step out of the life she had carefully built for herself and into a world that, up until now, had felt so foreign to her? She looked up at Jack, meeting his gaze. "I need some time to think about it," she said finally, her voice steady. Jack nodded, understanding. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." And with that, he stood up, leaving her with the weight of the decision she would have to make. As she sat there, alone with her thoughts, Christina realized that her life was about to change, whether she was ready for it or not. Christina spent the next few days in a daze. The world she had known, the quiet, predictable life of a waitress, had suddenly become blurry. Jack's offer weighed heavily on her mind, and each time she walked through the restaurant, she felt like she was walking in someone else's shoes. She had been in this business long enough to know that things like this didn't happen to people like her. She wasn't a CEO, she wasn't a business mogul. She was a waitress. But then again, she had never been treated like just a waitress by Jack. The days passed, and each time Jack came in, his gaze would meet hers, and for a moment, he would smile, a smile that was more than just politeness. It felt like an invitation, a challenge, but also a recognition. He had seen something in her, something she had never seen in herself. The quiet waitress who had blended into the background was suddenly standing on the edge of a very different world. The offer Jack had made kept circling her thoughts. Could she really take that step? Could she really leave behind the life she knew and embrace a world of power and high-stakes decisions? She wasn't sure, but every time she thought about it, her heart pounded. It was a decision she knew she couldn't avoid for long. Christina was used to solving problems. She did it every day at the restaurant. But this wasn't a problem she could just solve by making the right move in a conversation. This was about her life, her future, and everything she had built for herself. One evening, after a particularly busy dinner shift, Christina found herself staring at the reflection in the restaurant's window. The glow of the city lights flickered across her face, but her mind was elsewhere. She had never imagined herself being part of a world like the one Jack belonged to. Yet, there was something undeniably tempting about the idea. She thought back to their conversation, to the way he had looked at her when he made his offer. It wasn't just a business proposition, it was a real opportunity. The problem was, she didn't feel ready. She wasn't even sure what she wanted. She had built a life for herself in the quiet corners of the city, a life where she could keep to herself and move through the world unnoticed. She had always been fine with that. But now, everything had changed. That night, after she finished her shift, she sat in her small apartment, the glow of her phone screen lighting up her face as she stared at the contact information for Jack. It was there, right in front of her, the decision she had been avoiding. Her fingers hovered over the phone, unsure of what to do. The message from Jack was simple, just a few words that felt like a lifeline. "When you're ready, let me know." She knew she couldn't avoid it forever. She had to make a choice. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she wasn't afraid of the opportunity itself. What scared her was the possibility of failure, of stepping into a world where she didn't belong. Could she keep up with the demands of high-level business? Would she be able to handle the pressure, the expectations? And most importantly, could she live up to the potential Jack saw in her? That night, Christina decided to sleep on it. She knew she had to make a decision, but not today. Tomorrow, she would face the reality of the offer. She had always been a quick thinker, but this time, it was different. This was about more than just making the right decision in the moment. It was about her future, and that was something she couldn't rush. The next morning, Christina woke up with a sense of resolve. She had spent hours turning the offer over in her mind, and now, she knew what she had to do. She couldn't let fear control her life. If Jack believed in her, maybe it was time to believe in herself too. She had always been afraid of stepping into the spotlight, of being noticed, but maybe that was the very thing she needed to embrace. She had spent too much of her life staying in the shadows, avoiding attention, and playing it safe. It was time to take a risk. With newfound determination, she picked up her phone and sent Jack a simple message. "I'm ready." It was a small step, but it felt like a giant leap forward. As she hit send, she felt a mix of excitement and fear. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but she knew one thing. She was no longer just a waitress. She was someone with potential, someone who was ready to step into a world where she could make a difference. It was time to take control of her own destiny. Later that day, Jack called her, and the conversation was exactly what Christina had imagined it would be. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He got straight to the point. "I'm glad to hear from you," he said. "I knew you'd make the right decision. Let's start talking about next steps." The conversation was brief, but the weight of it lingered. Christina knew that she had just crossed a threshold. She was no longer standing on the sidelines. She was about to take her place in a world that had always seemed so far out of reach. Jack's voice on the other end of the line was calm, confident, and professional. But there was something more, something deeper in the way he spoke to her. It was as if he saw something in her that no one else had. She didn't know what that meant for her future, but she was ready to find out. As she hung up the phone, Christina felt a surge of energy and anticipation. She had no idea what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer afraid of the unknown. She was ready to embrace it. Christina woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. The decision she had made the night before was settling in, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was in control. The phone call with Jack had been brief, but impactful. He had a way of making everything sound simple, clear, as though the path ahead was just waiting for her to take that first step. And now, as she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, she knew that step was coming fast. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was about to enter a world she had never dared to dream of, a world of business, power, and opportunity. Christina dressed quickly, the familiar uniform of the restaurant replaced by a simple but professional outfit. She had no idea what to expect when she walked into Jack's office later that afternoon, but she knew it was a turning point in her life. For years, she had kept to herself, content to remain invisible. She had hidden behind her work, behind the quiet life she had built. But now, things were different. She was ready to show the world who she really was. As she stepped out into the brisk afternoon air, Christina couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She had worked in restaurants for so long, but stepping into Jack's corporate world felt like a completely different universe. The sleek buildings, the expensive cars parked in front of the office tower, the busy professionals rushing in and out. It was all so overwhelming. But Christina wasn't backing down. She walked through the lobby with purpose, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. The receptionist greeted her with a smile and directed her to the elevator. The ride to the top floor felt like the longest minute of her life. When the doors opened, she stepped into a space that felt both familiar and foreign at the same time. Glass walls, modern furniture, and the hum of people working at their desks filled the air. Jack's office was at the far end of the floor, his name on the door in sleek, silver letters. Christina took a deep breath and knocked. "Come in," Jack's voice called from inside. She opened the door and walked in, trying to appear calm even though her heart was racing. Jack stood up from behind his desk and smiled when he saw her. "Christina, I'm glad you came. Please, have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. She sat down, and for a moment, they both just looked at each other. There was an unspoken understanding between them now. "How are you feeling?" Jack asked, his tone warm but professional. Christina hesitated for a moment. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "But I'm also excited. I've never done anything like this before." Jack nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I get it. But that's why I reached out to you. You're exactly what I need. You see things that other people miss. You don't get caught up in the noise." Christina couldn't help but smile slightly. "I've always tried to keep my head down, stay out of the spotlight." Jack leaned forward, his eyes focused on her. "That's what makes you different. You don't play by the rules everyone else follows. You think for yourself." Christina felt a strange surge of confidence. She had never thought of herself that way before, but hearing Jack say it made her realize he was right. She had always trusted her instincts, even when no one else did. Maybe that was why he had noticed her. "So, what's next?" she asked, suddenly feeling like she was ready to dive in. Jack smiled, clearly pleased with her response. "Next, we start talking about the projects we've been working on. I need someone who can help me make the right decisions, someone who isn't afraid to challenge the status quo." He paused for a moment, then added, "I know it's a lot to ask, but I think you're more than capable of handling it." Christina nodded slowly. "I'm ready." And just like that, everything changed. She was no longer a waitress in a bustling restaurant. She was about to become a key player in Jack's world, helping shape the future of his company. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. But as she looked at Jack, she knew she was making the right choice. Over the next few weeks, Christina threw herself into the work. Jack had a way of making everything feel manageable, even when it seemed overwhelming. He gave her tasks that pushed her, challenged her to think outside the box. And each time she succeeded, she felt more confident, more certain of her place in this world. There were moments when she doubted herself, when she wondered if she truly belonged. But every time those doubts crept in, Jack was there to remind her of why he had brought her on in the first place. "You're doing great," he would say with that same warm smile. "Don't second-guess yourself. Trust your instincts." And so she did. She began to feel like she was part of something bigger than herself, part of a team that was building something important. The work was challenging, but it also felt meaningful. As she worked closely with Jack, Christina began to realize that he wasn't just the CEO of a large company. He was a man who had faced his own challenges, his own struggles. He wasn't perfect, but he had a way of making people feel like they could accomplish anything. Christina had always admired people like him, people who seemed to have it all figured out. But now, as she spent more time with him, she saw a different side of him, a side that was vulnerable, that didn't always have all the answers. It made her feel more connected to him, more like they were equals. And as she looked back at the journey she had just begun, she realized that it wasn't just about business. It was about finding herself, about pushing past the limits she had placed on herself for so long. And with Jack's guidance, she knew she was on the right path. Christina was no longer just a quiet waitress. She was someone with a future that she was ready to take control of. Christina's new life was nothing like she had imagined. Every day, she woke up to a world that seemed both exciting and intimidating. Jack's office was now her second home, and the work she had once thought of as far beyond her capabilities was becoming something she handled with growing confidence. Every task, every project Jack assigned her, pushed her to think differently, to be more strategic, and to trust her instincts more than ever. Yet, no matter how much she accomplished, there was a part of her that still questioned if she truly belonged here. She had started as a waitress, after all, someone who had always kept a low profile, quietly moving in the background. Now, she was sitting in board meetings with Jack, helping make decisions that could shape the future of his company. The change was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Christina's days were filled with new challenges and new faces. Jack's team was diverse, a mix of sharp business minds who had been with him for years. They were all talented, but they hadn't yet seen Christina for who she truly was. She knew she had earned Jack's trust, but she wanted more than that. She wanted to prove herself to the rest of the team. And she got her chance one Wednesday afternoon when Jack called her into his office for a private meeting. "Christina," he said, his voice calm but with a hint of excitement, "I need your opinion on something. We have a potential partnership with a big tech firm, and I'm going to need your perspective on a few things." Christina looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. Jack had never asked for her opinion on something this big before. "What's the project?" she asked. Jack smiled and slid a folder across the desk to her. "They want us to help streamline their operations, but there's a catch. They're very traditional, very set in their ways. If we're going to work with them, we'll need to convince them that we're the right partner." Christina opened the folder, scanning through the documents. The numbers, the projections, and the technical jargon were overwhelming at first. But she quickly realized that her ability to read between the lines, the skill that Jack had noticed in her from the beginning, was exactly what would give her an edge. "This is all about trust," she said, looking up from the folder. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Trust?" "Yes," Christina said. "These people are used to doing things their way. They've probably been successful in the past, but now they need a change. We can't just sell them our services. We need to sell them on the idea that we understand their business and we can help them evolve." Jack nodded slowly, clearly impressed. "That's exactly what I was thinking. But how do we make them see that? We need something more than just words." Christina leaned forward in her chair, her mind racing as she considered the problem. "We need to show them, not just tell them. We need to take a real, hands-on approach. Show them how we've helped other companies overcome similar challenges. Let them see the results for themselves." Jack's eyes lit up. "That's a great idea. We need to create a case study, a demonstration of what we can do for them." Christina smiled. "Exactly." As they discussed the details, Christina could feel her confidence growing. She was no longer just the quiet waitress who had been noticed for her language skills. She was now an integral part of Jack's team, contributing to important decisions and playing a role in the company's success. After the meeting, Jack gave her the go-ahead to start putting together a strategy for the partnership. For the first time, Christina felt like she truly belonged. She spent the next few days working late, poring over the project details, researching the tech firm's history, and creating a plan that would not only impress them, but make them realize they needed Jack's company to succeed. When she presented her ideas to Jack, he was impressed. "This is perfect, Christina," he said, smiling proudly. "You've done exactly what I hoped you would. You found a way to connect with them on their level." Christina felt a wave of pride. It wasn't just about proving herself to Jack anymore. It was about proving to herself that she was capable of more than she had ever believed. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Christina worked closely with Jack and the team to finalize the proposal for the tech firm, and when it was time to present it, she felt both nervous and excited. The meeting was set at the firm's headquarters, a sleek, modern building in the heart of the city. Christina stood next to Jack as they entered the conference room, surrounded by executives and decision-makers from the firm. As they made their presentation, Christina couldn't help but notice the skeptical looks from some of the executives. They were a tough crowd, and they weren't easily impressed. But as Jack spoke about the potential partnership, Christina saw the shift in their faces. They were listening. They were thinking. And when it was Christina's turn to speak, she stood tall and confident. "What we're offering isn't just a service," she said, her voice steady. "We're offering a partnership. We understand the challenges you're facing, and we believe that we can help you not only adapt but thrive in this changing landscape." The room fell silent. Christina's words hung in the air, and for a moment, she wondered if she had said too much. But then, one of the executives spoke up. "This is exactly what we need," he said. "We've been looking for a partner who can not only deliver results, but understand our needs and help us grow. We're in." Christina smiled, a feeling of accomplishment sweeping over her. She had done it. She had earned their trust, and in doing so, had proven to herself that she was more than just a waitress. She was a key player in a world she had once thought was out of reach. Christina walked out of the tech firm's headquarters that afternoon, feeling a sense of pride she had never known. The proposal had been accepted. The tech firm was officially on board, and the partnership was a go. It was a monumental moment, not just for the company, but for Christina herself. She had gone from a quiet waitress to someone whose decisions could impact millions. It still felt surreal, but as she stepped onto the busy city sidewalk, she couldn't help but smile. This was only the beginning. That evening, when she returned to the office, Jack greeted her with a look of approval. "You did great today," he said, his tone casual but warm. "The tech firm's response was exactly what I hoped for. You've proven you're not just another member of the team. You're an integral part of this." Christina felt a rush of gratitude, but also a twinge of uncertainty. "I'm glad they liked it, but I still can't believe it's all happening so quickly." Jack chuckled. "That's how it goes. When you make the right moves, things fall into place faster than you expect. And you've been making all the right moves." Christina felt herself blush at the praise. She had come so far in such a short amount of time, but she still didn't fully believe in her own abilities. "I just did what you asked me to," she said. Jack leaned back in his chair and looked at her thoughtfully. "No, Christina, you did more than that. You took what I gave you and made it your own. You trusted your instincts, and that's what made the difference." The words sank in, and for the first time in a long while, Christina felt truly seen. She wasn't just following orders anymore. She was creating something of her own. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and strategic planning. Christina was involved in every step of the process, from negotiating with the tech firm to working with Jack's team to finalize the details of the partnership. She felt herself growing more comfortable in the role, more confident in her decision-making. The nerves she had once felt when walking into Jack's office had begun to fade. She was starting to see herself as a leader, not just someone who supported others. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. As the stakes grew higher, so did the pressure. There were late nights, long hours, and moments when it felt like everything was teetering on the edge of chaos. At one point, Jack called her into his office, his expression serious. "We're facing a challenge with the integration process," he said, tapping a stack of papers in front of him. "The tech firm is having trouble adjusting to our way of doing things. We need to find a way to make it work, or we could risk losing them." Christina's heart skipped a beat. She had never been in a position like this before, where the success of a major deal was hanging in the balance. "What can I do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty she felt. Jack smiled slightly. "I'm glad you asked. I think you might be the key to turning this around." Christina looked at him, unsure of what he meant. I've been thinking about this for a while, Jack continued. You've been doing an incredible job working with the team, but what we need now is a different kind of leadership. The tech firm respects you. They've seen your work, and they trust you. You're the bridge we need to help them adjust to our methods. The weight of his words hit Christina all at once. She wasn't just playing a supporting role anymore. She was being asked to step up, to take on a leadership position and guide the company through a critical time. I can do it, she said, her voice firmer than she expected. Jack nodded. I know you can, and I'll be right here to support you. The next few days were a whirlwind. Christina dove headfirst into the challenge, coordinating with both teams, addressing concerns, and working closely with the tech firm to help them adapt to Jack's company's culture and methods. She spent hours on calls, had countless meetings, and worked through difficult conversations. There were moments when she felt overwhelmed, moments when she wondered if she was in over her head. But each time, she reminded herself why she was here. She wasn't just doing this for Jack. She was doing it for herself, for the person she had become. Slowly but surely, things began to fall into place. The tech firm started to adjust, and the tensions that had once threatened to tear the partnership apart began to ease. Christina's leadership skills, which she had once doubted, were finally shining through. By the time the integration was complete, the partnership was stronger than ever. The tech firm had fully embraced Jack's company's approach, and the collaboration was paying off. Christina stood in Jack's office one evening, looking out over the city as the sun set behind the skyscrapers. She felt a deep sense of pride, not just for the success of the deal, but for how far she had come. Jack came in and stood beside her. You did it, he said quietly, his voice filled with admiration. You took charge, you solved the problem, and you made it happen. This is what leadership looks like. Christina smiled, her heart swelling with pride. I couldn't have done it without you, she said softly. Jack shook his head. No, Christina, you did this. I just gave you the opportunity to show what you're capable of. As she looked out over the city, Christina realized that she wasn't the same person who had walked into Jack's office months ago. She had grown. She had found her place in a world that had once seemed out of reach. And she knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning of her journey. Christina stood at the edge of the city, looking out over the skyline as the evening lights flickered to life. The world around her was changing faster than she could comprehend, and yet, it felt like everything was falling into place. She had faced the challenges, tackled the doubts, and found herself not only surviving in Jack's world, but thriving in it. The leadership role she had taken on with the tech firm had been a turning point. It wasn't just about getting the deal done anymore. It was about proving to herself that she could handle the pressure, make the tough decisions, and come out stronger on the other side. Every day had been a step forward, and every challenge she faced only made her more determined. But as the weeks passed, Christina couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. There was a sense of fulfillment that she had achieved professionally, but on a deeper level, she wondered if she was losing herself. The life she had built for herself in the shadows of the restaurant, the quiet world where she had always felt safe, seemed further away with each passing day. She hadn't had time for much outside of work. The long hours, the meetings, and the constant pressure had taken their toll. She had lost touch with friends, missed family gatherings, and barely had time to reflect on the person she had once been. It wasn't that she regretted her decision to join Jack's team. Far from it. But she couldn't help but wonder if the person she was becoming was the person she had always wanted to be. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, Jack invited her to dinner. It wasn't unusual for him to extend such invitations, but this time, there was something different about it. It wasn't about business, at least not directly. Jack had asked her to meet him at a quiet restaurant near the office, a place away from the constant hustle of their everyday lives. Christina agreed, curious about what the evening would hold. She arrived a little early, as usual, and sat down at the table, trying to shake off the tension from the day. The restaurant was warm and intimate, a stark contrast to the sleek office buildings and cold, corporate spaces she had become so accustomed to. When Jack arrived, he looked the same as always, impeccably dressed, confident, and in control. But there was a softness to his demeanor that evening, a kind of openness that made Christina wonder if this was a different side of him. Christina, he said, taking a seat across from her, I've been meaning to talk to you about something. His voice was calm, But there was an edge to it, a seriousness that made her pay attention. "I've noticed how hard you've been working," he continued. "And I'm proud of you. You've proven yourself in ways that I hadn't expected, and I think we both know you're capable of even more." Christina felt a flush of pride at his words, but at the same time, she couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty that lingered in her chest. She had worked so hard to get to where she was, but now that she was here, she felt like there was a part of her she was losing along the way. "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft. "It's been a lot, but I'm glad I can contribute." Jack studied her for a moment, his eyes sharp but understanding. "I know it's been a lot," he said, "but that's not what I want to talk to you about." Christina looked at him, puzzled. Jack leaned in slightly, his expression more earnest now. "I'm offering you something more," he said, his words hanging in the air. "Not just a position or a title, but a chance to shape the direction of this company. I want you to take on a leadership role with more responsibility. Not just overseeing the partnership projects, but taking charge of new initiatives, helping to lead the way forward." Christina was taken aback. She had expected this moment, in some way. She had known that Jack saw potential in her, but this was different. This was more than just being a part of the team. This was an invitation to lead. "I don't know what to say," she said, feeling the weight of the offer settle heavily on her shoulders. Jack smiled, though there was a seriousness to his expression. "You don't have to say anything right now," he replied, "but I want you to think about it. I know you've got the skills, the vision, and the heart to make it happen. This company needs someone who can push boundaries and take risks. Someone who isn't afraid to step into the unknown. I think that person is you." Christina took a deep breath, processing his words. It was an incredible opportunity, but it also felt like a leap into uncharted territory. She had never seen herself as a leader, and yet here Jack was, asking her to step into that very role. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice steady but unsure. "Take all the time you need," Jack said. "This is a big decision, but I believe in you, Christina. I think you're ready for it." The evening stretched on, the conversation drifting to lighter topics, but Christina's mind was far from the small talk. She was grappling with the enormity of Jack's offer and what it would mean for her future. As she left the restaurant that night, the cool evening air hit her like a wave, but the feeling in her chest wasn't the chill of the night. It was the weight of the decision she had to make. Would she continue down this path, becoming more and more immersed in a world that had once seemed so distant? Or would she step back, find a way to regain balance, and rediscover the quieter parts of herself that had once felt so important? Christina didn't have the answers yet, but she knew one thing for sure. Whatever decision she made, she would no longer be the person she had been. She was already changing, already becoming someone who was ready to take on more, whether she was ready for it or not. Christina sat at her desk, staring at the screen in front of her. The opportunity Jack had offered her weighed heavily on her mind. It had been several days since their dinner, and despite the reassurances from him, she still couldn't shake the uncertainty she felt. She had always been the quiet observer, the one who kept to the background, and now, suddenly, she was being asked to step into the spotlight, to lead, to take charge of something bigger than herself. The thought terrified her, but deep down, she knew it was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. This was her moment to prove not just to Jack, but to herself, that she could rise to the challenge. And yet, as much as she wanted to embrace the chance, a part of her still feared what she might lose in the process. The balance she had so carefully built between her personal life and professional commitments seemed to hang in the balance. She had already seen how her time had been consumed by work, how the relationships she once cherished had faded into the background. She couldn't afford to lose more. She couldn't afford to lose herself. The phone on her desk buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Jack. "Christina, let's meet tomorrow morning. We need to discuss the next steps." She stared at the message for a long moment, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. This was it, the moment of truth. She had been waiting for this, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure she was ready. The next morning, Christina arrived at Jack's office early. She had spent the night tossing and turning, unable to decide if she should take the leap or pull back. She had always trusted her instincts, but now her instincts were conflicted. She had built a career from her quiet, steady nature. Was she really prepared to step into the unknown and embrace the kind of leadership Jack was offering? As she walked into his office, Jack looked up from the papers on his desk, and smiled. "Good morning, Christina. I'm glad you're here." He gestured for her to sit, and she did, feeling the weight of the decision she had to make pressing down on her. Jack studied her for a moment, as if he could read her thoughts. "I know this is a big decision," he said, his voice calm. "But I wouldn't be offering you this if I didn't think you were ready." Christina met his gaze, her heart pounding. "I appreciate that, Jack," she said quietly. "But I'm not sure if I'm ready for something this big. I've never seen myself as a leader. I've always been in the background, doing the work, but never in charge of it." Jack leaned forward, his expression softening. "I understand your hesitation, but let me tell you something. I've worked with a lot of people, Christina. I've seen a lot of talent. But what you have, what I see in you, is different. You don't lead the way most people do. You lead by example. You inspire those around you without even trying. And that's what this company needs." Christina felt a wave of warmth wash over her at his words. She had never seen herself that way before. She had always been the quiet one, the one who followed, not the one who led. But Jack saw something in her that she had never fully recognized. "I don't know if I can live up to that," she said, her voice tinged with doubt. Jack shook his head. "You already are. You've already proven that. You've handled every challenge I've thrown at you, and you've done it with grace and intelligence. What's missing is your belief in yourself. That's the only thing holding you back." His words hit home. It wasn't the lack of ability that held her back. It was the lack of confidence in herself. She had always been afraid to step out of the shadows and take charge. But now, she realized, she didn't have to do it alone. She had Jack's support, and more importantly, she had the skills to make it work. "I'm scared," she admitted, looking down at her hands. "I'm scared of what I might lose, of what I might become." Jack's voice softened. "I understand that. But sometimes, Christina, you have to take a leap of faith. The rewards are worth it. And trust me, you won't lose yourself in the process. You'll become who you were always meant to be." Christina took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had come so far, but the thought of stepping into this new role still felt overwhelming. But Jack was right. If she didn't take this opportunity, she would always wonder what could have been. It was time to take the leap. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "I'm in. Let's do this." Jack smiled, his eyes shining with approval. "I knew you would be. And I promise you, Christina, you won't regret this." As she left Jack's office that morning, Christina felt a surge of excitement mixed with a sense of peace. She had made the decision. She was no longer the quiet waitress in the background. She was ready to lead. She was ready to take on whatever came next, knowing that she had the strength and the support to succeed. Christina's first few days in her new role were a whirlwind. Every morning, she entered the office with a renewed sense of purpose, but also an underlying anxiety. It was one thing to make the decision to lead, but it was another to actually do it. The responsibilities piled up, the expectations grew, and every move she made felt like it was under a microscope. She had never been in a position where every decision could have such an impact. There were moments when she doubted herself, moments when she questioned if she was truly ready. But she reminded herself of the words Jack had said to her. He believed in her. She had to believe in herself. As the days passed, Christina started to find her rhythm. The first big challenge came when the tech firm, which had been a key partner in Jack's latest venture, began to show signs of tension. They were struggling to adjust to the rapid changes the company was implementing, and the friction between the teams was starting to show. Christina was asked to step in and mediate, a role she hadn't expected so soon. She spent hours analyzing the situation, speaking to both sides, and trying to understand the root of the issue. She found that the problem wasn't just about the business strategies, it was about trust. The tech firm felt alienated, like their needs weren't being fully understood. Christina, drawing on her experiences as a waitress where she had learned to listen and adapt to different people, realized that her ability to empathize was exactly what was needed. She approached the tech team's leaders and proposed a solution. "We need to meet them halfway," she said confidently. "We can't expect them to just adopt our methods without understanding their challenges. Let's listen to what they need and adjust our approach." Jack, who had been watching from a distance, nodded in approval. "That's exactly what I was hoping to hear. Let's give it a shot." Christina organized a meeting between the teams. It wasn't easy. The room was tense, and there were moments when it felt like nothing would change. But Christina stayed calm, facilitating the conversation and ensuring that everyone had a chance to voice their concerns. By the end of the meeting, they had a clearer understanding of each other's perspectives, and the tension began to ease. The deal, which had once seemed on the brink of failure, was back on track. Christina felt a surge of pride. She had navigated the situation with the skills she had honed over the years, listening, mediating, and finding common ground. She wasn't just following Jack's lead anymore. She was carving her own path. That evening, Jack called her into his office. "You did well today," he said, his voice steady but filled with approval. "You turned a potential disaster into an opportunity. That's leadership." Christina smiled, but there was still a nagging feeling in the back of her mind. She had accomplished something significant, but she couldn't ignore the growing pressure she felt. The higher she climbed, the more was expected of her. She was no longer just the quiet waitress, but she was still figuring out who she was in this new world. The following week, things took another turn. Christina was asked to attend a high-stakes meeting with investors who had shown interest in a new project. These investors were some of the most powerful people in the industry, and the weight of the situation hit her the moment she walked into the room. The room was filled with sharp, experienced business minds, all with their eyes on the potential profits. Christina felt like an outsider, unsure of how she fit into the picture. Jack was there, of course, but it was clear that this meeting was her moment to shine. "Christina, you know this project better than anyone," Jack said, nodding for her to take the lead. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to her. Her heart raced, but she took a deep breath and began to speak. She knew the numbers, the projections, and the potential risks inside and out. But it wasn't the facts and figures that she focused on. It was the story behind the numbers. She talked about the vision, the growth, and the impact the project could have. She spoke confidently, weaving together the data with a vision of what the future could look like. As she spoke, she noticed the shift in the room. The investors were no longer just looking at the numbers. They were listening to her, really listening. They saw the passion and the strategy behind her words. By the end of the meeting, they had made their decision. The project was moving forward. Christina felt a rush of relief mixed with disbelief. She had done it. She had led the meeting, and it had been a success. As she left the room, Jack caught up to her. "That was impressive," he said with a grin. "I knew you had it in you, but seeing you step up like that, it's exactly what this company needs." Christina felt a surge of pride, but also something else, a sense of uncertainty. She had just achieved something huge, but she wasn't sure where to go from here. Her journey was just beginning, and while she was proud of the progress she had made, there was still so much to learn. She wasn't the same person she had been when she first walked into Jack's office, but she wasn't sure who she had become yet. For now, though, she knew one thing for certain. She was ready to face whatever came next. She had earned her place at the table, and she wasn't going to let fear hold her back anymore. Christina's success with the project had brought her an unexpected sense of accomplishment, but it also marked a turning point she hadn't fully anticipated. With each victory, the expectations for her grew. As much as she had embraced her leadership role, the pressure to continuously prove herself began to weigh heavily on her shoulders. She was no longer just contributing to the company. She was now at the forefront of its future, and that meant the stakes were higher than ever before. The weight of her position started to settle in, and she found herself spending late nights at the office, scrutinizing reports, strategizing for upcoming projects, and preparing for meetings that could change the direction of the business. Jack was still there, guiding her and offering advice, but there were moments when Christina felt like she was on her own, handling everything. It was during one of these late nights that Jack called her into his office. He had been watching her closely and seemed to notice the shift in her. "Christina," he said as she walked in, "I've noticed the pressure you're under. You've been doing an incredible job, but I can see it's starting to take a toll." Christina sat down across from him, feeling both exhausted and relieved that he had acknowledged it. "I'm fine," she said, though her tone was tired. Jack didn't buy it. "You're handling everything like a pro, but remember, no one can keep up this pace forever. You need to take a step back and reassess. You can't keep sacrificing your well-being for success." Christina hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She had always prided herself on her ability to handle stress, to manage everything without asking for help. But lately, it felt like she was running on empty. Jack's words hit home, and for the first time, she realized that she had been neglecting herself in the pursuit of success. "I don't know how to stop," she admitted quietly. I feel like if I slow down, everything will fall apart. Jack looked at her, his expression softening. Christina, you can't pour from an empty cup. You need to find a balance. I've seen what you're capable of, but you can't do it alone. Lean on your team. Lean on me. The conversation was a wake-up call for Christina. She had been so focused on proving herself, on taking on every challenge that came her way, that she had forgotten to take care of herself. She had forgotten that leadership wasn't just about managing others. It was also about managing herself. The next day, she decided to take Jack's advice to heart. She delegated tasks to her team, asked for help where she needed it, and made a commitment to stop working past midnight. It wasn't easy at first. She was used to being the one to do everything, but slowly, she began to trust her team more. She learned to let go of the need to control everything and to recognize that asking for support didn't make her weak. In fact, it made her a stronger leader. Over the following weeks, Christina began to find a new rhythm. She still worked hard, still gave her best effort every day, but she no longer sacrificed her personal time for it. She made room for self-care, for reflection, and for moments of rest. As she grew more comfortable with this new balance, she noticed a shift in herself. She was no longer the overworked, stressed-out leader who feared falling behind. She had learned to embrace the idea that success didn't have to come at the cost of her well-being. Jack noticed the change too. One day, after a particularly successful presentation to a new client, he pulled Christina aside. I'm impressed, he said, his tone warm. You've really grown into this role. But more importantly, you've found your balance. That's the mark of a true leader. Christina smiled, feeling a sense of pride she hadn't expected. She had come so far, from the quiet waitress in the background to someone who had earned the respect of her team and her colleagues. But more importantly, she had learned how to lead with integrity, with strength, and with balance. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, she felt confident in where she was and where she was going. She wasn't just a leader. She was a leader who understood that taking care of herself was just as important as taking care of the company. That realization changed everything. It wasn't about being perfect or achieving success at any cost. It was about finding a way to succeed while staying true to who she was, and most importantly, taking care of herself along the way. Christina knew that no matter what challenges came her way, she was ready to face them with a clear mind, a balanced heart, and the support of the team around her. Christina was beginning to feel like she had found a solid footing, but as the weeks passed, new challenges started to arise, testing everything she had worked so hard to build. Her team had grown accustomed to her leadership style, and the work was flowing smoothly. Yet, as the demands of the company increased, so did the complexity of her role. She had proven herself capable of handling high-level negotiations, managing projects, and leading her team with a calm, focused demeanor. However, there was still one obstacle she hadn't fully faced: how to lead through uncertainty. The company was moving forward with ambitious plans, and with each new project, the stakes seemed higher. Christina's mind often raced as she tried to anticipate every possible outcome, preparing for every scenario. But no amount of preparation could shield her from the unpredictable nature of the business world. One afternoon, she found herself sitting across from Jack in his office, feeling a sense of unease in her chest. The latest project was running behind schedule, and several key team members were becoming frustrated with the increasing pressure. Jack had noticed the shift, and he could sense Christina was struggling. You look like you've been burning the candle at both ends, Jack said, leaning back in his chair. How are you holding up? Christina hesitated, not wanting to show any sign of weakness. I'm managing, she said, though the words felt hollow. Jack studied her for a moment before speaking. I know you're capable of handling a lot, but you don't have to do it all alone. You've been juggling so much, and sometimes, even the best leaders need to lean on their team. Christina felt a pang of guilt. She had always prided herself on being self-sufficient, but Jack was right. She had been carrying the weight of everything, believing that if she just worked harder, everything would fall into place. But now, as the pressure mounted, she realized that she couldn't keep up this pace. She needed help. I don't want to let anyone down, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack's expression softened. You're not alone in this. The strength of a leader isn't about doing everything yourself. It's about knowing when to trust your team, when to delegate, and when to step back and let others take charge. Christina nodded, taking in his words. She had always been afraid of being seen as weak or incapable. But now, she realized that true strength came from vulnerability and the ability to ask for support when it was needed. Over the next few days, Christina made a conscious effort to trust her team more, to lean on them for support. She delegated tasks more effectively, asked for input from others, and slowly began to give herself permission to rest. It wasn't easy. The pressure was still there, but little by little, she found that her team stepped up in ways she hadn't expected. As they worked together to get the project back on track, she realized that her role had shifted from being the sole leader to being a facilitator, guiding and supporting her team as they worked toward a common goal. The team became more cohesive, and the sense of camaraderie that had been missing earlier was starting to grow. One evening, after another successful round of meetings with the tech firm, Christina sat down at her desk, looking at the progress they had made. She had stepped back and allowed others to take the lead, and it had paid off. The project was back on track, the team was functioning as a well-oiled machine, and for the first time in weeks, Christina felt a sense of peace. Jack stopped by her desk, his usual calm smile on his face. "I'm proud of you, Christina," he said. "You're leading in a way that's sustainable, not just for you but for the entire team." Christina smiled, grateful for his guidance. "Thank you, Jack. I think I'm finally starting to get the hang of this." Jack's smile widened. "You're doing more than getting the hang of it. You're thriving. You've learned one of the most important lessons in leadership. It's not about doing it all yourself. It's about empowering those around you to succeed." As she left the office that night, Christina felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in weeks. The work was still challenging, but she no longer felt overwhelmed by it. She had learned to trust her team, and more importantly, she had learned to trust herself. She wasn't perfect, and there would still be challenges ahead, but for the first time, she felt like she was leading with balance. She was no longer just managing the company. She was helping it grow in a way that was sustainable and fulfilling for everyone involved. Christina had come a long way from the quiet waitress who had once hidden in the background. She was now a leader, one who understood the power of vulnerability, trust, and collaboration. And as she looked ahead, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready to face it, not alone, but with the support of her team and the confidence in her own ability to lead. The months passed, and with each passing day, Christina's confidence as a leader grew. She had faced so many challenges, learned so much about herself, and navigated through difficult decisions. But it wasn't just the big moments that defined her progress. It was the smaller, quieter victories that had shaped her into the leader she had become. The pressure had never truly gone away, but Christina had learned how to handle it. She no longer felt overwhelmed by the weight of her responsibilities. Instead, she had embraced the idea that leadership wasn't about perfection or doing everything herself. It was about making decisions, empowering her team, and finding a way to balance it all. And with that balance came peace. As the company flourished, so did Christina. The business was expanding, the team was thriving, and the culture Jack had nurtured was only getting stronger. Christina had become a true extension of that culture, a leader who cared about the well-being of her team and was determined to help them succeed. But even with all the growth and success, she never forgot where she came from. She didn't forget the days when she had been a waitress, quietly working behind the scenes, unsure of what her future would hold. Those early days had shaped her into the person she was now, someone who was not afraid to take risks, to learn, to grow, and to lead. One morning, as Christina sat in her office, reviewing a report, her phone buzzed with a message from Jack. "We need to talk," it read. Christina's heart skipped a beat. She had grown accustomed to his messages, but this one felt different. There was no small talk, no preamble. She set the report aside and walked to his office, her mind racing with possibilities. "Christina," Jack said as she walked in, his tone more serious than usual. "I've been thinking a lot about the future, and I wanted to talk to you about the next phase of this company. You've done an incredible job, and I'm proud of everything you've accomplished. But I think we're ready for something bigger. Something that requires a leader who's not just good at what they do, but who's also ready to shape the future of this company in a whole new way." Christina sat down across from him, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady. Jack paused for a moment, looking at her with a hint of admiration. "I'm stepping back from the day-to-day operations," he said quietly. "And I want you to take over as CEO. Christina blinked, shocked. She had worked with Jack for so long, learned from him, supported him. But to be asked to take his place, to lead the company in the way he had, was something she had never expected. Jack, she said, her voice wavering slightly, I don't know what to say. This is huge. Jack smiled, his eyes full of respect. I know it's a lot to take in, but I've seen how you've grown. I've watched you lead with vision, with empathy, and with strength. You're ready for this, Christina. You've earned it. Christina felt the weight of his words settle over her. She had dreamed of moments like this, but never thought they would come so soon. She had worked for years, taking small steps, making careful decisions, and now, here she was, standing on the edge of something enormous. I don't know if I'm ready, she admitted, feeling vulnerable. Jack leaned forward, his gaze steady. You're more than ready. The question is, do you believe in yourself enough to take the reins? Because I believe in you, and that's what matters. Christina took a deep breath. She had always doubted herself, always questioned whether she was truly capable. But in that moment, she realized that this was the culmination of everything she had worked for, the result of every decision, every risk, and every lesson. She was ready. She didn't have to be perfect. She just had to be herself. I believe in this company, she said, her voice strong. I believe in the team we've built, and I believe in what we can achieve together. I'm ready. Jack's smile widened, a look of pride crossing his face. I knew you would be. Welcome to the next phase, Christina. As she left his office, the weight of the decision still heavy on her shoulders, Christina felt something shift inside her. This was no longer about proving herself. It was about leading with authenticity, with purpose, and with the knowledge that she didn't have to do it alone. She had a team, a vision, and a future that was hers to shape. The journey she had started as a quiet waitress had come full circle. She was now the leader of a company that was changing the world, and she was ready to take it to new heights. And for the first time, she felt truly confident in her place in that world. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, no doubt. But Christina knew that she was no longer the person she had once been. She was a leader, and she was ready to lead with everything she had.